Welcome back to Dr. Finance. This is a paper written by James Tobin, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1981. This is what he published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics in 1941, which started as his master's thesis, titled A Note on the Money-Wage Problem. Is the money-wage rate an independent determinant of the volume of employment, or does a general change in money wage alter the level of employment only if it happens to affect some other variables in the system, such as the rate of interest? According to Keynesian theory, the money wage is not an independent determinant of employment, abstracting from effects due to the specific situation, which general theory cannot predict. A change in the money wage will not by itself affect the level of employment. By influencing the demand for money balances for transaction purposes, a rise or fall in the money wage may raise or lower the rate of interest, and a change in the interest rate may influence more or less investment and accordingly change the volume of employment. But this shaky line of causation is the only channel through which general wage policy can influence the volume of employment. This note will examine some assumptions which underlie the Keynesian theory of the effects of employment of a change in the money wage rate and their relations to the assumptions of Keynes' general theory, of which this wage theory is supposed to be a part. It is to be shown, number one, that Keynes' conclusion concerning wages and the employment of labor depend upon the assumption of behavior on the part of those supplying other factors of production, exactly contrary to the behavior which Keynes assumes for the factor labor. And number two, that Keynes' conclusion concerning wages and employment depend upon the assumption that individuals as consumers react towards money values in a way which is exactly contrary to the assumed behavior as wage earners. Chapter 1. The exposition of money-wage doctrine in the general theory, and Pigou-Kaldor discussion of the problem in the Economic Journal were carried on within the framework of a model which assumed, among other things, that labor is the sole prime factor. This model rules out the possibility of substitution between other factors and labor as a result of the change in the money wage rate. This fact has led some economists to dismiss the Keynesian money wage doctrine on the ground that it is incompatible with the theory of substitution between factors, with marginal productivity analysis. As Lerner has shown, however, recognition of the possibility of substitution does not alter the Keynesian conclusions, provided that one assumption is added to the usual Keynesian assumptions for the problem. This additional assumption is the crucial thing. It is that all factors other than labor are fully employed and other prices completely flexible. In order to demonstrate how crucial this assumption is, it will be well to rehearse the process by which a change in the wage rate is absorbed into the system. In this section, we shall accept all the Keynesian assumptions, including the crucial one we have just listed. The Keynesian results will follow smoothly. This account will incidentally show that, given the necessary assumptions, Keynesian money-wage doctrine is perfectly reconcilable with marginal productivity theory. In section 2, we shall show that Keynesian doctrine breaks down if the crucial assumption is removed, and we shall consider the validity of the assumption. And in section 3, we shall examine the crucial nature and validity of another, of the Keynesian assumptions. From the standpoint of theory, it makes no difference whether the argument is expounded in terms of a money wage rise or a money wage cut. The two cases are symmetrical, and translation from one to the other is easy. Each case, moreover, has practical importance, since each is frequently proposed as a remedy for unemployment. Out of the difference to the tradition in discussion of this problem, the argument here presented is in terms of a money wage cut, but it is equally applicable to a money wage rise. Consider then the case of a general cut in the money wage rate. Consider it first solely from the point of view of marginal productivity theory, which takes no account of reactions on the demand side. Faced with reduced labor costs and unchanged demand curves, businessmen will naturally expand output. This will be one reason for an increase in the employment of labor. Further, marginal productivity theory tells us that the impulse of entrepreneurs who find that wages have been lowered will be to hire more labor relatively to other factors whose prices are unchanged. None of these other factors will in fact be dismissed, since by assumption the prices of these factors are perfectly flexible and will be lowered sufficiently to keep them fully employed. This process will continue until these prices are so low that there is no longer any inducement to try to substitute labor for other factors. This point will occur when the ratio of the price to the marginal product for each of these other factors is once again equal to the corresponding ratio for labor. This will not restore the prices of the various factors to their former relation to each other. For the hiring of labor, the expansion of output have altered the relation of their marginal products. In the new equilibrium, there will be expanded output, increased employment of labor, and the same employment of other factors. This is the story which marginal productivity analysis tells us, but it is not the whole story, for we cannot continue to assume unchanged demand curves. With more labor employed than before, and with no less of other factors, the real income of the community must be greater. According to Keynes' psychological law of consumption, with larger real income, the community will try to save more. Let us assume investment to be constant in real terms at some level K. In the system, if the system was formerly in equilibrium, then the rate of saving at the former level of real income must have been K. Now, however, real income has been increased, therefore saving must be greater than K. This excess of saving over investment will continue so long as consumers' real income is not exactly as large as it was before. For so long, entrepreneurs will be receiving less than they pay out as costs. They will be forced to contract output until they are producing the same amount as before. This amount they cannot produce except by restoring the previous level of employment of labor, because the prices of other factors are always adjusted so that these factors are fully employed. This result is not at all inconsistent with marginal productivity theory. As the demand for their products diminishes, entrepreneurs will attempt to dismiss both laborers and other factors. Since the tendency to dismiss other factors will result in a lowering of their prices, while the wage rate remains constant, they will dismiss labor. The rise in the marginal product of labor relative to that of other factors during this process must be just offset by the fall in the prices of other factors. Otherwise, it would be profitable at least at each level of demand to substitute labor for other factors or other factors for labor. This means that when the former total output and total employment are reached, the price of labor must be in the same proportion to the prices of other factors as before the original wage cut. The net result is that all prices are reduced in proportion to the wage cut, and employment and output are the same in the new equilibrium as in the old. In order to isolate the effect of wage policy, we neglect the possible effect on the rate of interest of this reduction in prices and assume that the supply of money is perfectly elastic. The same argument applies mutatis mutandis to a rise in the money wage rate. It will step up all prices proportionally and leave employment and output unchanged. Chapter 2. It is easy to see the crucial nature of the assumption that all factors other than labor are fully employed and that their prices are perfectly flexible. If the person who supplied these factors acted differently, they would not always adjust their money rates of remuneration so that they are fully employed. If entrepreneurs' demand for them fell off, their prices would not fall sufficiently to keep some of these factors from becoming unemployed and being replaced by labor. This would be the result in case of a cut in the wage rate. Consequently, even granting that the original level of output is restored, it would be produced more by labor and less by other factors. There would be in the new equilibrium more employment of labor than before. Conversely, a wage rise would, under these circumstances, result in decreased employment of labor. For if other factors were not fully employed to begin with, it would be possible for entrepreneurs to obtain more of them at the same rate or at the higher rate of necessary. They would be substituted for labor, and in the end, the same output would be produced less by labor and more by other factors. It is clear, therefore, that this assumption is crucial to the Keynesian money-wage doctrine. But this assumption means that the persons who supply these other factors are expected to behave differently from the persons who supply the factor labor. Wage earners, according to Keynes, are interested in the money wage, and they will supply more labor at a given real wage the higher is the money wage. The consequence of this attitude of wage earners is that the money wage is likely to be rigid. The persons who supply the other factors in the Keynesian society act quite differently. They are not at all interested in their money rate of remuneration and always adjust it so that the factors they supply are fully employed. Professor Leontiev has shown that Keynes' propositions in regard to the supply of labor amount to a denial. For the supply of labor of what Leontiev calls the homogeneity postulate, namely that all supply and demand functions, with price taken as independent variables, are homogeneous functions of the zero degree. Keynes, however, does not deny the homogeneity postulate in regard to the supply and of any other factor. The retention of the postulate for these other factors is one of the reasons that Keynes is able to come to the special conclusions he reaches concerning one factor for which he denies the postulate. Certainly, Keynes could not reach the same conclusion for any other factor. For example, executive personnel, as he does for labor. For one of his data would be that the money wage rate is fixed, not perfectly flexible. Keynes presents no reasons for this all-important distinction of treatment between labor and other factors. Lerner, however, asserts that it is plausible and in conformity with the assumption of rationality of entrepreneurs and capital owners who would rather get something for the use of their property than let it be idle, while labor has non-rational money wage demands. It seems doubtful, however, that non-rational money price demands are confined to labor. Executive and professional personnel may well have non-rational money salary demands. Salaried classes probably do not look upon a halving of the price level as equivalent to a doubling of money income, and they may often be financially more able than labor to afford the luxury of such non-rationality. Nor is this attitude completely irrational. As a matter of fact, their taxes, their debts and interest obligations, their insurance premiums remain constant in money terms. These same considerations apply, though perhaps with less force, to the behavior of landlords. Moreover, raw materials and intermediate products belong on the list of other factors. And the entrepreneurs who control their supply very often pursue, sometimes with the aid of government policies designed to stabilize money prices. Here is a case of money price demands on the part of entrepreneurs analogous in effect to the non-rational money wage demand of labor. Whether these prices and wage policies are in fact rational or not need not be discussed here. The conclusion is that the money prices, salaries, and rents of other factors are likely to be rigid, just like the money wages of labor. There is a possibility of fluctuation in the use of these other factors, just as there is a possibility of less than full employment of labor. If the existence of a price rigidity in all sectors of the economy is recognized, if the denial of the homogeneity postulate is generalized, the Keynesian money wage doctrine cannot be maintained. The money wage rate becomes once again an independent determinant of the volume of employment. So far, it has been shown that Keynes' failure to generalize his denial of the homogeneity postulates to the supply of factors other than labor is responsible for his particular doctrine of money wages. We now must note that there is an even more important place where he failed to generalize his denial of the homogeneity postulate with even more serious results. For Keynes assumes that given the broad forces which mold consumption habits, consumption is a function of the size and distribution of real income alone, to the exclusion of money income. In other words, at any level of money income, at any level of money income, the same amount of goods will be consumed and the same amount saved out of a given real income. This assumption Keynes adopts by defining income, consumption, and saving in terms of wage units, and asserting that consumption so defined is uniquely determined by income, whereas Keynes' wage earners are concerned with their money wages and are not at all conscious of the price level. Keynes consumers keep an eagle eye on the price level and are solely concerned with their real incomes. But wage earners, after all, form a large part of the consuming public. It is realistic to believe that they have non-rational money wage demand. Surely, it is just as realistic to believe that they are equally non-rational in their consumption decisions. The same holds for non-wage earners if, as we have contended, their attitude towards money values is likely to be the same as that of wage earners. At any rate, though reasons have been presented in support of the proposition that their personalities are split, it is easy to see that this assumption too is essential for the process described in section 1 above. For let us assume instead that given the distribution of income, a greater sum will be saved from a given real income, the higher the money income, and a greater sum from a given money income, the higher the real income. This would be the natural behavior of members of a money-dominated economy. They would consider themselves worse off simply because of a decline in money income and would save less accordingly. Then it is clear that if money incomes were to fall enough following a wage cut so that the former levels of real income and employment were restored, saving would be not equal to but less than investment. Saving in real terms would be less than before the wage cut. Saving would be equal to investment at some higher money and real income, and employment would be greater in the new equilibrium than in the old. Likewise, a wage rise would regain its independent power of causing a decrease in employment. By denying the homogeneity postulate in regard to the supply of labor, Keynes introduces the possibility of involuntary unemployment of labor at a given money wage. That is, more laborers could and would go to work at this wage if the price level were raised. Then he proceeds to show that this involuntary unemployment cannot be remedied by reducing the money wage. This demonstration succeeds only because Keynes assumes that to the supply of all other factors and the supply of saving, the homogeneity postulate does apply. In short, Keynes carries his denial of the homogeneity postulate, his recognition of monetary realities far enough, and just far enough so that he can, number one, prove the existence of involuntary unemployment of labor, and number two, prove that altering the wage rate does not affect employment. Thus, the Keynesian doctrine that the money wage is not an independent determinant of the volume of employment rests on two assumptions, which are both shaky in a factual basis and inconsistent with other parts of Keynesian's schema. One is that the person's supplying factor other than labor behaves so that these factors are always fully employed and their prices perfectly flexible. The other is that consumers behave so that saving is a function of real income to the exclusion of money income. By dropping the former, we find that a wage cut can increase employment or a wage rise reduce it. by causing substitution, even if it does not alter the level of real income. By dropping the latter, we find that a wage cut will increase employment and real income, or a wage rise reduce them. Substitution or no substitution. When the two effects are superimposed, the rise or drop in employment becomes all the greater. The removal of these two assumptions, or of either one of them alone, reinstates the money wage rate as an independent determinant of the volume of employment. Thanks for listening.